I see you, Mary.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this UNB Talks webinar called Growing Herbs from Seed to Table. My name is Mary Duffley, and I'm the Assistant Director of the UNB Associate Alumni. And we're very proud of the many opportunities we've been able to offer you, our alumni, this past year, from professional development to special interest webinars. We've been really grateful to connect virtually with hundreds of alumni, if not thousands, all around the world. We do hope to return to in-person gatherings maybe later this year, but we will continue to offer these virtual events like today's webinar moving forward. Before I introduce our expert, I wanted to review a few housekeeping items. Many of you have submitted questions when you registered, and we're going to do our best to get to those within the hour that we have today. If you have any additional questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll monitor those and get to those as well as if we can. The webinar is set up as a meeting, so you can keep your cameras on. We'd love to see your faces, but please make sure that you're muted, so when Kim is speaking, that there's no other background noises. And we expect to spend at least part of the time at the very end, probably 20 to 25 minutes on a Q&A, so please make sure that you share your questions and concerns with Kim, and she'll address those. So with everything happening this past year, gardening has become incredibly popular for many people. I'm seeing on my social media feeds people starting gardening, whether it's on their decks or whether it's making significant gardening space in their backyards. Being outside and working in the garden is certainly one way to tune out what we're currently experiencing around us with this COVID situation. So I'm very pleased to introduce an alumna, Kim Osepchook, who has over 17 years of experience in organic gardening and is the owner of a small farm. She was just telling us actually that she's expanding her farm in Quispam 6 called Axil Gardens. And there she grows crops for the community and small batch garden products, all with the focus on soil health and environmental sustainability. Kim has had the pleasure of selling vegetables and herbs directly to customers at local farmers markets and through a weekly community-supported agricultural program. If you eat in any of the restaurants and some of the restaurants in and around St. John, you may be tasting some of the fresh produce from Kim's garden because she services some of the local restaurants in the St. John and surrounding area. So before I turn it over to Kim, I wanted to just quickly do a poll just to get a sense of what your expertise is in gardening, those who are online, and share your thoughts with us. Kim will certainly speak to all levels to a certain degree, but just to kind of get a sense of who's in the room. It looks like we have a lot of beginners and intermediates, Kim, which I guess is no big surprise. More probably beginners than anyone, 52%, and 36% consider themselves intermediate, and we have 12% who are experienced, which is nice.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I'll turn it over to Kim and she will begin.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mary. I'm excited to be here today. This is something new that I've been doing, is a little bit of online learning, and it's wonderful. I'm really excited that so many people have, like Mary said, taken to gardening over the last year, and I've seen a lot of beginning gardeners. I've had a lot of questions sent to me via email or through my social media. And it's really encouraging. I really think that, especially considering the last year that we've had, it's a great way to kind of escape and just get out and get grounded. And we all kind of need that. Certainly something that we don't talk about often enough is how wonderful gardening is for mental health. So I think really the more people who are doing it and at any level is wonderful. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining today. My subject, obviously, I don't know if you guys have printed off your handouts or not, but we are going to talk specifically about herbs. And the reason that I chose herbs was because I had kind of made the assumption that, you know, everyone likes herbs and they're fairly easy to grow. I chose 3 in particular to start from seed because all 3 are fairly easy to start from seed. And I think that at any experience level, starting your crops from seed and being able to take it from seed to table is a wonderful skill to have. And that it's one of those practice makes perfect. So don't be discouraged. One thing that I usually say to all beginning gardeners is you're going to kill a lot of plants, and that's okay. So that's part of the process. I've been doing this for a really long time, and I have killed a lot of plants. Don't give up, and especially, you know, when you're starting from seed, there's a few little things and tricks to know. So let's go over some of those together, and then we're going to plant our seeds, and then we'll get into a question period. I have some that have been sent to me already that you have asked, and then if there's anything on the spot that we have time for, we'll cover those as well. So herbs are just amazing. I love having them both. I have huge gardens outside, but I also grow them in containers on my back patio because I love to have them easily accessible to the kitchen and to be able to just go out and pinch from some and throw them into anything that we're eating, whether it's a cooked dish or fresh salads. They're really lovely, and again, a great starting point for any gardeners. So flavor is obviously something that is fantastic when you're growing your own, but then it's also ease of growing with herbs as well. Those are kind of the big bonuses in why to bother growing your own herbs. The other thing is that they're expensive. So, you know, you go to the store and you'll get your big package of herbs and it's going to cost you $5, and you may use a few sprigs. That's all you need for your dish, but then you end up having this package in your fridge that is probably going to go to waste. I know it happens to me all the time because it's more than I needed for a particular dish. So having it growing on your back patio is a great way to avoid wasting and just being able to harvest what you need. So some common culinary herbs that I grow most of these. I chose today the cilantro and the basil. I guess we're doing calendula as well, if any of you don't like cilantro, and then dill. So those 3 are fairly easy to start from seed. And all 3 are annuals in our area. So there is, actually, I've included in the handout a nice mix of annual and perennial herbs. So, and I have a mix of both in my garden. The perennials are really nice because you plant them once essentially. And again, occasionally you'll have one that doesn't make it through the winter. But generally when you buy a perennial herb, you put it into the garden and it's going to come back from year to year. So I have herbs like sage and lovage, oregano. I have mint, lemon balm, and all of those are perennial. Thyme as well, chives as well. And then my annuals are the cilantro and the basil, parsley, rosemary in a different plant hardiness zone. So we're in zone 5B. And in a different, I guess if we were higher number, then rosemary would also be considered a perennial. But here in New Brunswick, we have to dig it up and bring it inside and or just buy new every spring. So generally by the time the fall comes, I'm pretty exhausted and I don't always dig up my herbs and bring them indoors. So rosemary, I generally buy plant starts at this time of year and plant them out in the garden. So yes, these 3, so cilantro, basil, and dill, and we're going to add calendula if you are a cilantro hater, which we were just discussing before we got started. Cilantro is one of those herbs that you either love it or you hate it. So it just seems like there's no in between. If you're not a cilantro fan, that's totally okay. You can either plant more of your basil seeds, or you could do more of the dill seeds if you love either of those, or if you wanted to try calendula, which is an herb, but I think a lot of people think of calendula as a flower because many people grow it for the flower. They're gorgeous. They come in all kinds of different colors. They're a great companion plant in your vegetable garden. And I collect the flowers and dry them because they're also medicinal. So if you have calendula, that would be something else that we could be planting today. So in terms of the three that we have today, we have the cilantro and the dill and the basil. The cilantro and the dill are both cool season herbs. And so they could have been, well, I started planting mine indoors all the way back to, I think it was about early April. So they really like the cool temperatures of spring. And so you can start them indoors and transplant them outside and or direct sow the seeds into the garden beds or into your containers much earlier than you can basil. So that's the main difference between the three. And also, I guess, let me go back to cilantro here. Cilantro, I see this a lot with people who try to grow cilantro because it really likes the cooler spring temperatures. Conversely, it doesn't like the hot temperatures of summer. So you'll see often, I know people try to grow their cilantro and they'll put it in a full sun location in the garden, and it will go to seed or go to flower rather really quickly. And that's called bolting. And essentially it's just the plant is stressed and it's going to try to produce its seed as quickly as possible. So you have two options if that happens. One is that you can let it go to flower. It's got really pretty white flowers on it, and then it will produce the seed. And those seeds are coriander seeds. So it's funny that that plant has two names, but when it's in plant form, it's cilantro, and then when it's seed, it's coriander, which is often used in Indian dishes and used for cooking. So you can actually, if you want, you can leave the seeds on. You can pull them off once they're big and round and they've turned brown. So they'll be green first and then turn brown. And you can collect those and keep those in a mason jar and have them for cooking. So it's kind of a dual purpose crop. So something with cilantro, if you were growing it into the summer months, put it in a spot where it doesn't get too much direct light. So even just 4 hours of direct sunlight on a cilantro plant through the summer will be plenty. And that will just delay that bolting process and you'll have the leaves for longer. And then basil, like I said, basil it's an annual. It loves a lot of heat. So kind of the warmer spot you can find for it, the better it will be happy there. It loves full sun. Full sun is considered anywhere from 6 to 8 hours plus. So they don't have to be consecutive hours. So on your back space, your patio or backyard, if you have say 4 hours in the morning of direct sun on that space, and then there's a pause in the day where maybe it's shaded, and then you have another 4 hours later in the day, that's still full sun. So basil would do fine in that location. And the great thing about basil seeds is they germinate quickly, and where it's warming up outside right now, they will grow really fast, which is wonderful. They don't like any amount of cool. So at night, if we get anything that's in around 0 at all, or even I wouldn't put them out at night at all yet. The daytime, they could be going out a little bit, but if we get frost, it will completely kill your basil. So just kind of keep that in mind as you plant your seeds and then you have your seedlings. Watch the weather forecast for that. Dill is annual. Again, it likes moist soil and it will thrive in all light conditions. So you can put it on a sunny patio or you can keep it in a partial sun area and it will still thrive, which is great. Cilantro and, well, any of these crops really, you can do succession planting. So we'll plant some seeds today, and then in 2 weeks' time, if you want to have a successive or continuous crop, you could plant some more seeds in a couple of weeks, and then a couple of weeks later, you could do it again. So I try to do that with as many crops as possible, just to kind of keep harvesting as long as I can, rather than just having the one plant. And for instance, your cilantro has bolted, gone to seed, and then you don't have any more cilantro. Well, if that were to happen, the one that you've planted a few weeks later, you're still going to be able to harvest the leaves from. So I do recommend that. So starting herbs from seed, it's fairly easy to start most herbs from seed. At this time of year, I don't start many herbs from seed except for those that I'm direct sowing outside now. So if you were looking at getting, say thyme or parsley, oregano, any of those plants, I would just buy them as plant starts at this point. Because starting from seed, they're going to take quite some time to germinate and then also to size up large enough to be able to harvest from. So lots of the garden centers right now have all kinds of herbs if you're looking to create an herb garden this year. But in terms of starting your own seeds, these three will be great. So they're fairly fast growing and they're fairly easy to care for. So I guess what I'll do is, so I've made a space behind me here where I can do some planting. So hopefully, if you have materials, so if you guys have your pots and you have your soil, we're just going to talk about planting seeds. And some things to keep in mind. What I've done with my soil, I've already pre-moistened it. So whenever I start anything from seed, potting soil can be very dry when it first comes out of the bag. So just maybe give your soil a gentle watering and just mix it in so that it's already kind of pre-moistened, and we'll plant some seeds. So I'm going to move my chair and move back here. Okay, so I have here some of these guys are about 4 weeks old at this point. They've been growing in the greenhouse, so this is what you can expect in probably 3 to 4 weeks. It was cooler 3 weeks ago, so they're slower to grow when it's cool out. But now that it's warm, things grow a lot faster. So from seed, a couple of things to keep in mind. The first tip I would give you is the larger the seed, the deeper it's going to be planted into the soil. So I've got my 3 pots here, and I'm just going to fill them up. No matter what your stage in growing is, I always recommend that you use containers that have holes, drainage holes in the bottom. And if you're going to grow them in your windowsill, you'll just want to put a plate underneath to catch the water should it go down through the bottom of the soil. But especially for outdoors, if you're going to be transplanting these into your outdoor container in, say, 3 weeks' time, make sure that your container has the drainage holes in the bottom, because herbs don't like to have their roots sitting in water at all. So I'm going to fill these guys up. And you'll see that we have kind of 3 different sizes of seed. Cilantro being the largest, and dill is kind of the medium size, and basil is the really, really tiny seeds. So I'm going to fill up my containers, and I'm going to start with cilantro. So if you have some cilantro seeds, you can pull those out, or I guess coriander seeds. You can pull those out, and we'll start with those guys. Sometimes with larger seeds, I didn't do it today and it's not necessary, but just as a little tip, larger seeds like the coriander, you could actually soak those overnight before planting, and that will just kind of, I guess, jumpstart the germination process. And so some of my larger seeds, especially things like peas, in terms of vegetables, peas and beans, I do it with anything that's shelled or wrinkly. So shelled would be like sunflowers. Any of your zucchini, squashes, I'll soak those overnight, usually just overnight, certainly not any longer than 24 hours before planting. And like I said, it'll just kind of jumpstart that germination process for you because the seed has already absorbed lots of moisture. So I've got my 3 pots. Like I said, I'm going to start with my coriander or cilantro seed, and they're a good size. They're fairly large, and so you're not going to lose them in the soil at all. But what I would use as a guide, I tend to use, it's just easy for everybody, but in terms of how deep you want to put your seeds, the coriander, I use on my baby finger, I use my first knuckle as, and that's an easy one for everyone to use, as my guide. So no deeper than that. That would be about ½ an inch. So no deeper than about ½ inch. The larger seeds can go that deep. If you're doing something vegetable wise, that's a really, really big seed, you could go as deep as an inch, no problem. But these aren't huge, right? I mean, they're not like a green bean seed. So we're just gonna go half an inch at the most. And all I'm gonna do is in a pot, I've got a 4-inch pot across the top. I'm just gonna do 3 holes. And I'm gonna put a couple of seeds in each. So something that I always do when I'm planting, no matter what it is I add extra seeds. You can always trim them out later or pick them out later, or even separate the roots and put them in a different pot. But better to have more, like too much than too little. And you just never know. Sometimes, you know, germination can be funny, or if you forgot to water one day. So I'm gonna put a couple of seeds in each of those holes. And then I'm just gonna cover them up. And I'm going to gently pat down the soil. So you don't want your soil in your pots to ever become too compact. It'll be really difficult for the roots to form. And you know, it's kind of counterintuitive, but roots need oxygen too. So we don't want to have our soil really compact. Just gently, it's called seeding the seeds in by patting them down. And then I'm going to give them a watering. The first time, so any seeds that I'm planting, I always give them a really, really good soak. So this is the one time that you don't have to worry about overwatering your plants. They want to be nice and moist. You want the seeds to have all kinds of moisture to be absorbing and start the germination process. So don't be shy with the water. And what you could do to actually keep the moisture in, depending on your pot size, is you could even wrap or cover. You could use plastic wrap to cover the top of your pots, or you could use a plate, anything that you like to just kind of keep that moisture in and keep it from evaporating. So the more moisture and humidity you can keep in while your seeds are germinating, the more success you'll have. So there's our, if you're like me and you forgot your popsicle sticks or any kind of a marker, then just mark on the pot itself what you've planted so you don't forget later. So there's my cilantro. Medium-sized seed is going to be the dill. And dill doesn't need to be quite as deep as the cilantro because the seed itself is a little bit smaller. So again, I'm going to do 3 areas, 3 holes in this pot because it's 4 inches across. It can easily house that many. And I'm going to do about a 1/4 inch, so not very deep at all. The dill seeds are quite small. And again, in each spot, I'm just going to put, I think I'll even do 3 seeds in each hole for the dill because dill is quite fine and feathery, so it can probably house more plants than the cilantro will. So again, I'm just patting them down, and I'm going to give it a really generous water, mark on the pot what you've planted. And we'll move on to basil, which is really, really, really teeny tiny seeds. So something to keep in mind that I should mention too is occasionally you'll get really, really small seeds. Always check your seed pack because some seeds, basil does like to be covered, but some of those really tiny seeds, so an herb, for example, that I grow from seed that is really small that needs light to germinate is chamomile. So if you want to grow, you know, a mixture of herbs, maybe you want to try something like chamomile, you're not even going to bury those seeds at all. You actually just lay them on the soil surface, and you're going to put them somewhere where they're going to get some light and just keep the soil surface really, really moist. So always check your seed packs and make sure that you know what the light requirements are for germination. There we go. We've got our cilantro, we have our dill, and then the teeny, teeny, tiny basil seeds. So basil seeds, what we're going to do is barely put them in the soil. So like even less than a 1/4 inch. A 1/4 inch will be fine, but I'm barely making a dent in the soil. And I'm going to sprinkle quite a few basil seeds in here just for backups. They're so tiny you can barely see them. So I'm going to put those just barely in the soil. You don't want to put them too far down. So the reason we're not planting any of these any deeper than say a 1/4 inch is because when the plant emerges from the seed, it's going to take some energy to get up to the soil surface. So we don't want to make it any more difficult than it needs to be. So just barely burying them so that the distance for them once they germinate to the soil surface is not too far. And then I'm going to water that in again. Again, don't be shy with the water at the beginning. This is the time when you can give it a really good soak. Don't worry about that. We want it nice and moist. Again, moisture, humidity for germinating seeds is exactly what you want. So then just make sure you've marked your containers. Like I said, while your seeds are germinating, they don't need any light. So you don't have to be worried about getting them into your window just now. All you want to focus on is just making sure that the soil surface doesn't dry out. So like I said, give them a cover with a plate or some saran wrap and just wait until you start to see the green emerging from the soil. So once that happens, you'll remove the cover, whatever you have, whether it's plastic wrap or some plates. You're going to take those off and you're going to find your sunniest window. At that point, all you're going to focus on is just making sure that your soil doesn't completely dry out. Don't overlove your plants, your seedlings, with too much water. If you're not sure how much water you should be giving your seedlings, just use the touch test. I usually, away from the plants, I'll just check an area of the pot, maybe an inch down, and see how it feels. So if it feels dry, then I'll give it a light watering. But sometimes the soil surface will look dry, and then when you feel underneath, it's actually still moist. So that's a great way to tell whether or not you actually need to water them. So that's about it. So easy peasy. These are going to go into your sunniest window, like I said. Something to keep in mind when they're growing in the window is that as your seedlings grow, they're going to lean towards whatever direction the light is coming from. So something you can do often is turn your plant. So you'll find it, this has been in the greenhouse, so he's going straight up, but in a window, he would lean over. So you just want to turn your pot regularly to make sure that he kind of straightens up in between the leaning back and forth towards the sunlight. And those are my 3 plants. So there's my basil, that's the dill, and there's the cilantro. So I think that's about it. One thing that I keep it handy for my germinating seeds is a spray bottle. I find that's a nice way, like when they're just starting to emerge from the soil, I just give them a little misting. So rather than watering really heavily when they're just little, I just give them a little misting to keep the soil surface moist, and that seems to do the trick. Okay, so if your plants get really tall and leggy, so say they're about this size, I'll put it up against my white shirt. If they get to about this height and they start to, or I guess this size, and they start to get really tall and leggy and lanky, that's probably a good indicator that you don't have enough sunlight in that location. You could transplant them, like move them into their permanent container where you're going to put them outside, and you can start the process of getting them acclimated to being outdoors. That process is called hardening your plants. So I'm going to come back over and we'll talk about that. So whether you are growing from seed or whether you are buying transplants at the garden center, your plants need to be hardened. So essentially they've been in an environment where they've had very stable conditions. It's not windy, obviously. And so you don't want to just simply plunk them into the garden or into your container and stick them outside, because they're going to get shocked. So you want to spend some time hardening those plants. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to take them out gradually every day, do maybe 2 or 3 hours the first day in kind of a shady spot and not overly windy. So somewhat protected, somewhat shady, take them out for a couple of hours and then increase that amount of time throughout the week. You can do it for 5 to 7 days and bring them in at night. So you're not going to leave them outside immediately off the hop overnight. But when you've gotten to the point where they've had, you slowly increase the amount of direct sunlight, you slowly increase the amount of time they're spending outside, and you think they're ready, then you get to that 5 to 7 day point and you can just leave them right outside, overnight included. So that is going to be totally possible for the cool season crops. So that cilantro and the dill, those two herbs would be fine to be hardened and planted outside now. The calendula and the basil, they'll want to be inside for a little bit longer, especially, like I said, if we have the cooler nights. So neither of them will appreciate that, those cool temperatures. So just make sure you bring them in at nighttime. Okay, so general care of your herbs, that's where we are. So all herbs are more productive if you are regularly harvesting from them. So that's something that you want to try to make a mental note to do, is regularly go out and pinch some leaves off. You can use them fresh, like I said, or use them in some cooking. You can preserve them, but it'll extend the life of your herb, of your plant, if you are regularly harvesting. So try to make a mental note to do that. Let's see, so.
Kim, it's Mary, just on that, I always struggle as to what, like basil, I use basil a lot.
Yeah.
So do I clip the biggest leaf? What do I do? Where do I clip the bottom? Do I clip the top?
No, so that's a great question. So if you flip over to the page that says at the very top, it says watering at the top and then harvesting towards the bottom. I've actually included a diagram, and that's specifically about harvesting basil, because that's a question I get often. And so I'm going to grab my basil.
Yeah, show me.
Okay, here we go. So this is 3 plants that I bought from Sobeys. I bought a fresh herb plant, basil plant, probably about 4 weeks ago now. I clipped off a couple of branches and I stuck them in a cup of water and I rooted them, and then I planted them into this pot. And I've got a lot more basil off of that one plant than I would have if I just harvested from that plant. And the trick is with basil, you want it to grow more outwards than you do upwards. So if you look at your diagram, if you happen to have it handy, let's see, how can I show you so you can see this? Maybe if I put my camera down. Okay, let's see. So the way that basil grows, I'm going to clip a whole thing off here so I can just show you on the branch. Just a sec here. So if you use, let's see if I can use my fingers. Oh, I've got scissors right here. Look at that. It's almost like I planned it. Okay, here we go. So the way that the basil branches grow is they grow in pairs. So let's say this is actually on the basil plant, and you can see in this section here and above each leaf, there's an opportunity for another branch to grow. So rather than just pinching off this leaf and saying, okay, I'm going to use this one, that's actually not going to do much for the plant in terms of signaling where and when it should start growing again. So if I flip it, let's see, you can see here, I've got, no, this is really tricky. Okay, let's see. When you're pinching your basil, essentially, you want to take a pair of leaves at a time. So in this case, I've got this shoot that has 2, okay, here. So I would pinch off on this branch, I would pinch off this double. So take the 2 at a time. And then underneath here where I just pinched it from, this will actually, this spot, that will grow a new branch. So don't pick your basil one leaf and kind of randomly around the plant. You really want to encourage it to produce more branches, more leaves. And the way to do that is to harvest in leaf pairs, like so. Okay.
Good tip.
And yeah, and there's a photo. So if you're not clear on that, which is really hard to do from this angle, but have a look at the handout, because I did kind of indicate there how you would cut, and you'll be able to see those spaces above the leaf where the new branches or the baby leaves are going to grow and get bigger. Hopefully that's somewhat clear.
That helps. I could be all wrong,
yeah.
basically. Okay.
So yeah, so best practice actually when we can move right to harvesting. So best practice when you're harvesting herbs is mid-morning and after the dew has dried. So you want to harvest as often as possible, like I had mentioned. And they're all different in terms of where you want to harvest from on the plant. So basil, like I said, you want to pinch 2 leaves at a time to encourage these areas to grow back. So above this leaf, like right here, that's a branch there and that's a branch there. That's going to grow out, right? So I pinch the center piece out and then these ones are going to grow. Cilantro, on the other hand, when you're harvesting from cilantro, you're going to go around the base of the plant and you're going to take the outside leaves. So its new growth comes from the center of the plant. Comes from the center of the plant. So I wouldn't just go through and snip the entire thing. I would go through and I would take all of those outside leaves and leave the smaller ones in the center to get bigger and grow back. So that's the same with parsley. The new growth comes from the center of the plant. So I'm going to leave those guys. I've taken everything that was around the outside of the plant, the larger leaves, and I've left the center ones to grow back. So you'll get a faster recovery and more cilantro leaves quicker if you do it this way rather than snip the whole plant. Dill is a little trickier, but essentially there's one thing to look out for when you're harvesting dill, and that is where the new growth is occurring. So you don't want to snip your new growth. Let's see if I can bring this closer for you guys. There, I think you can see it. So right here is where we have our new growth, right here. So I would be totally fine to take the top of this leaf off and harvest that. This is obviously a very small plant. And snip around that new growth that I can see in the center. So let's see, right there. So, but if I was to accidentally take that new growth off, obviously there's nowhere for the plant to reproduce from new leaves. So just be conscious when you are harvesting your dill that you're kind of watching where that new growth is forming from, and harvest any of the other feathery leaves around that, but leave those ones because they're going to produce more for you. So that's about it for harvesting. What else did I? I'm going to get to watering because it's in the questions. So we'll discuss that when we get there. So transplanting or potting up or thinning your herbs. Let me check the time here. Oh, I'm still yammering. Okay, so I better wrap this up fairly quickly. So when you're transplanting your herbs, have a look at the roots. So if the roots are, wrapped around each other and they're kind of taking up the whole pot. Like these guys aren't even coming through the base of my container yet, so I know that's not root bound. If you happen to get one from the garden center that there's a lot of root system, they're coming through the bottom, maybe when you pull them out, they're wrapped all the way around the pot. You'll want to just give those a gentle tear. You're going to just shock the plant a little bit into growing more roots for you when you put it in the ground. So you're going to end up with a healthier plant by doing that. So yeah, you just want to make sure that you are hardening your plants, like I mentioned. And when you go to put them into a new container, for my herbs, I use good quality potting mix and compost. And then I'll use just a general purpose organic fertilizer. So I do my potting mix to compost as a 3-to-1 ratio. That's in your handout as well. And then I'll use you can use a slow release granular fertilizer. I use, the product is called Gaia Green, and it's a 444 and it's a powdered mix. I get it at Halifax Seed on Rossay Avenue. And I just do a light sprinkling of that and mix it in when I go to plant my small pot into my larger container. So that seems to be, it keeps them happy and healthy. It's worked well for me. So that's what I would certainly recommend. So I think we've gotten through most of this. I have included some recipes, really easy recipes. So when you're using your herbs fresh, sometimes, you know, we all get these mental blocks in terms of what to make for supper tonight. But there's a few recipes here for you. I love all of them so much. I could eat these every week, no problem. But basil pesto, if you haven't tried it yet, you can also use other herbs. Many herbs can be made into pesto. It's essentially just grinding the leaves up. There's also a dill aioli and fresh salsa for our cilantro lovers, pico de gallo, which is a Mexican salsa, fresh, and it's just so delicious. I could eat that every day also. So I won't go through it right now. I think we'll do some questions, but have a look at your handout when you have a minute. There's some suggestions there for preserving your herbs. There's different options. And do a little bit of reading, because not all herbs can be preserved in the same manner. So you don't want to treat them all the same. A lot of that depends on the water content of the herb's leaf as to how best to preserve them, whether it's drying, whether you're going to make a butter or an oil and put them in the freezer to use later, that sort of thing. But there's some suggestions in your handout. So certainly please have a look at those for some ideas.
A couple of people have asked about the handout. And just to remind them, we sent it, it's a PDF, and we sent it along with the Zoom link, but no worries, we'll follow up with everyone who's registered and send the recording, and we'll also include another copy of the PDF. So it's got some really great information in it that will help us guide us along. So thanks for sharing that, Kim.
Perfect. So is there questions that yeah, do you want me to just go over the ones that were sent, or should we do some live? What would you like? Yeah,
no, I'll give you, there's a couple of things that came up that I think you may not have necessarily touched on that were submitted. One of them is about the mold. Why do sometimes I get mold growing on top of the soil around my indoor herbs? Is that something that's overwatering, or?
It can be, yes. So that's an algae, and it can be very problematic, actually. So it can end up causing what's called damping off disease in your seedlings, and it tends to be an excess of moisture. So one thing that I suggest for when you see that happening on the soil surface is a small fan. So if you can increase the air circulation around your seedlings, that's only going to, it's going to be dual purpose. It's going to help with evaporation, so you don't have the moisture sitting on the soil, but it's also going to strengthen your seedlings. So the stems, as they're moving, you know, we were talking about hardening your plants and putting them outside. It's actually going to make them a stronger seedling. So yes, that is usually an overwatering issue. It's like I said, it's also air circulation. What you can do is, what I would recommend is, if you need to keep them in the same pot, then scrape the soil surface off. I would aerate, you know, you can use anything. You can use a butter knife and just kind of poke holes down into the soil to aerate it a bit and help the moisture evaporate.
Another question that just came in online was, will herbs take over a garden, particularly if they're a perennial?
It depends on the plant. So anything in the mint family, the answer to that would be yes, if we were talking about any kind of mint. Oregano can be very invasive. And what was the other one? Mint, oregano, lemon balm. So those, yes, the root, mint especially, the roots can be very aggressive, and so that's actually one herb that I would recommend growing by itself in a container. And actually, what I did was I took a really large container and I cut the bottom out of that container. It was about 2 feet deep. And I cut the bottom out of the container, planted my mint into that, and then planted that into the garden bed so that it contains those root systems, and they're not going to spread and take over your garden space, because once they've done that, it's a lot of work to get rid of them. So if you do that right from the beginning, you're more likely to have good success. I planted my orange mint. So there's so many flavors of mint. It's a great one to have. But I planted mine in a container last year, and I left it out in the garden. I watered it. They like their soil moist, so you do need to, the mint family, you do need to water fairly often. but I brought it into the garage through the winter months and put it back out in the spring, and it's grown back beautifully. So that's a great one for if you just want to grow something in a container on your back deck. Mint's a great one. I guess I could mention the ones that aren't invasive that are perennial. So some of them are on the first page of the handout. So thyme would be one, sage, chives, and lovage. Their root systems tend to stay put. I mean, they will very slowly from year to year. Their root systems will get a little bit larger, at which point you can actually split the plant and you could relocate your splits. But the thyme, those guys that I mentioned, they're not going to spread and be invasive and kind of take over your garden space.
What about companion planting herbs? I'm not sure what that means, but you probably know what that means. Should they be planted among your veggies or have a space of their own?
Aside from the mint family that I mentioned, I like to put my herbs right in with my vegetable garden, and many of them are good companions. Companion planting is very much just like it sounds. You are strategically placing plants together that will either they'll enhance the growth of each other or they'll benefit each other somehow. So whether that is deter a pest that likes a certain crop, they work together really well. There's the opposite too, where some plants don't want to be planted with each other. So that is something that if you're a beginner, it can be rather complicated. Don't get too caught up in it. But it is something that if you had some time to look into, figuring out kind of who will benefit who and who does not want to be planted next to each other, that's a wise use of time. But in terms of your herbs, so yes, I've got mine kind of all within my vegetable garden. And I always, a few off the top of my head, I always plant basil at the base of my tomato plants, always, every year. And sometimes I'll throw in some marigold plants as well around my tomatoes. Anything in the onion family is great to plant with carrots. So if you want to plant some perennial chives that'll come back from year to year, you could plant those in and around your carrot bed. Dill does great with cabbage plants. And so cabbage plants are a brassica family. So anything in that family, that would be broccoli, cauliflower, your cabbage, arugula, they're all the same plant family. So you could put your dill in with them. Mint goes great with cabbages or tomatoes. Oregano, you can plant anywhere with anyone. So all vegetables will benefit from having some oregano. So that's an easy one. And then parsley does really well with asparagus and tomato plants. So, I have one more. Rosemary does really well with beans and carrots. So in answer to the question, I guess, yes, 100%. I would put your herbs in with your veggies.
Somebody just asked a question which I found interesting. I want to grow coffee from seeds. I have the seeds, but need advice before I start. Wow. That's ambitious.
That's a big wow. I think that's a great idea. I've never personally grown coffee from seeds. I like to grind mine up and drink them.
To Kevin, who's doing that, I think, yeah, let us know how that goes.
Wow. I personally haven't tried that, so I can't speak to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, you need volcanic soil, and it takes 3 years before they actually grow enough to get a bean. So,
unbelievable.
Yeah.
That seems like a lot of work.
Seems like a lot of work.
It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
Send us some of your coffee when you get it done, would you?
Yes, sign me up.
I think there'll be Bailey's in that first coffee.
Sounds great.
Love that. Kim, there's some questions here that are sort of off the herb topic, which maybe we can sort of talk. And one of the ones is just, which I think is do you have any books that you would recommend to somebody who's just starting out in gardening for a beginner?
Yes, I do. And where did I put it? Just one sec. I actually have it in the office and I meant to pull it down. I think. Oh, no, I don't have it handy. I'll send you, Mary.
Yeah, the name and we'll follow up with everyone.
Let's follow up on that one because I do have one and I can't remember the name of it, but it was essentially, creating like a small garden in your backyard and everything like from the beginner's point of view. So I think if you're just new to it, this book would be fantastic. I have it all dog-eared and everything, but I don't have it handy. So I'll send you that, Mary.
Another one, which is probably a common one too, is people may have a garden, but they don't get any sun in the garden. So will anything grow if they don't have any sun in their garden?
Yeah. So what I would pay attention to is exactly how much direct sunlight you have. So there is a difference in terms of who will grow in that space. Whether it's less than 4 hours of direct sunlight for the entire day, or if it's 4 to 6 hours. So pay attention to that, because the 4 to 6 hours, you're going to have a larger selection of plants that will do okay in that space. Complete shade, which would be that 4 hours or less. It is trickier for sure to grow plants in that space, but not impossible. So you just want to research shade tolerant plants and really stick to those ones. Because if you put in something that loves lots of sun or heat, for instance, basil, it's just not going to thrive in that space.
What about buying, because everybody's at the garden shops now looking at perennials and annuals. Is it better to buy small perennials or larger ones that have blossoms? And it's the same for annuals. Is it better to have just the small little annuals, or is it better to have ones that have actual flowers and stuff on them? It's always the debate for me when I go shopping.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess it depends on the plant. So for me, I would personally be choosing, let's say tomato plants, for instance. I would be choosing those that do not have flowers on them. Reason being is that it's not really the tomato season in our area yet. So I would much rather the plant put its energy into making more foliage or more leaves and growing kind of more in the natural stages than to force it into having its fruit development in June when it's not really meant to. You could do both, I guess. So if you wanted to have your tomatoes really, really early, just don't expect, I guess, that plant will keep producing all the way through summer. So I guess if you wanted to do, one of each, so you have some early tomatoes and later tomatoes, you could go that route. But I tend to go for the smaller plants myself.
What about, you talked a little bit about soil and what you do with soil and fertilizer and nutrients. Do you have to replace the soil every year? So if you have a container and you've done your container and it's annuals, whatever, do you replace your soil every year?
I personally don't. So I try to reuse, it's generally like a potting mix. If we did that mix that I discussed earlier, that's the 3 parts potting mix and 1 part compost. Well, that's still useful as a medium. It's just not maybe as useful nutrient wise. So as long as what I would do with that, so I have these great big huge fabric pots and 30 liter and 20 liter ones, they're really big, and I just reuse the soil that's in them, but I'll remove maybe the top few inches, replace it with some fresh compost, mix it in well, and then I'll add my fertilizer and I'll just use that same soil. You could probably get away with doing that for a few years.
Okay. Somebody asked a question about lavender. Do you amend the soil with anything specific when you plant lavender in your garden?
So lavender, they like, if you picture kind of desert-like conditions, so they want full sun. They want lots of drier conditions. They want really well draining soil. And so if you're creating a space for lavender, you don't want to put them into like a clay soil. Clay soil would be very compact and difficult for the water to move through. So what you could do in preparing a bed for lavender is to add something like builder's sand. And that will just help the water move through the soil better. It will drain better, and your lavender plants will be happier.
Nice. And about containers, do you need special containers when you're doing your herbs? Going back to herbs again, like the clay pots, the small clay pots. I always find sometimes when I use the clay pots, they dry everything out too quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Now, on one hand,
They look cute though, but
they're so cute, but you're right, they do dry out really fast.
okay.
So one thing with watering herbs is that consistency is key. So whether you have herbs that prefer more moist soil, and that is something that I would recommend looking into, especially if you're going to plant multiple herbs in one container. You want to make sure that they like the same amount of moisture. So something like a lavender plant, or let's say a thyme plant, they're not going to need as much moisture in their soil. So you could put them in the same container. And then something like your basil and your cilantro and your dill that like a little more moisture, put those in the same container. In general, you're going to water as consistently as possible, whether it's a little bit for your more moisture loving plants, or the ones that you would only water say once or twice a week. And again, just use the touch test. So use your finger to be able to tell whether or not an inch down the soil is in fact dry. Did that answer your question? I feel like I went on a tangent. What was the
No, it was because it is. I heard about these clay pots, and I do find sometimes I tried using the clay pots last year for some of my herbs, and maybe I did something else wrong, but I just found
no,
that
you didn't.
so well.
Those clay pots are very porous, so they do actually let some of the moisture out. So they might work best if you wanted to plant something, Mary, like your lavender or sage, or the ones that like the soil to dry out between waterings would do better in a clay pot than the ones that like a lot of moisture.
Gotcha. We're coming up onto the hour, and I did want you to have an opportunity to share some more details about your local gardening membership. So can you talk a little bit more about Axil Gardens?
Oh, sure.
What folks can follow you on social?
Yeah.
But you have mentoring and consulting and coaching opportunities through your business. Right.
So I won't keep you too much longer, but Axil Gardens is market gardens, as Mary said. And something that I incorporated into the business around 2017 was educational opportunities. So what I like to do is I like to teach about gardening. I am crazy for it. I probably look like a crazy person out there all the time. I can't get enough of it. And I love to share that passion. And I just, especially with COVID last year, I really noticed that there was this uptick in gardening interest. And like I said, it's so great for mental health. But there are those obstacles in learning at the beginning. So one of the things that I have in place with my business is it's actually a season-long membership. It's virtual like this. You get a monthly garden guide. It's called the Growing Together membership. You can find more information on it if you wanted to know more details, or feel free to email me. My website is www.axilgardens.com. I'm also on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, Axil Gardens. And this membership in particular is virtual. So it's like this. We meet bi-weekly, all season long, right up until the second week in September, and maybe even further in, so that we can get everybody's garlic planted and that sort of thing. But the majority are beginning to intermediate gardeners that just want to have guidance and have somebody that they can ask questions to throughout the season, when problems occur, when they should be fertilizing, all of that, those sort of questions that come up commonly. So I guess basically I'm serving as your garden coach for the entire growing season, which is, it's been great for some people. So I'm really pleased with that. I do home consults as well. So if you wanted to set up a garden space, but you really don't know where to start, I do home consults where I come into your space and we create a garden plan together for you. Yeah, I guess.
Awesome.
Sum it up.
You have it. We'll share a slide too with Kim's contact information and where you can connect with her. So thank you, Kim. This has been incredible. I've learned so much. I've learned a lot of things of what I've done wrong. So
awesome. Oh, great.
God, I do better this season.
That's the goal.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your expertise with all of us. It's been incredible.
Thank you so much for having
to listen
me.
to you. It's you can tell how passionate you are. I do enjoy. Kim grows the most beautiful tulips, and I get to enjoy those and purchase those from her a couple times this past year. So it's been wonderful.
Yes.
So again, a special thanks to Kim, Also to obviously, we have some people behind the scenes, some of my colleagues who've been helping us with the back end. And we also have on the screen now, you'll see contact information for Kim if you want to get in touch with her. We also have our Affinity Partners that do provide a great deal of support to the office, to the association. And we're able to do some of the things, our activities and events because of their support. And we do support, and they also support some of our student activities. And it's TD Insurance, which is obviously home and auto and tenant insurance, and Manulife, which has health and dental and healthcare, and our credit card, MBNA. This is our last webinar for at least for the summer, but please stay connected to us and to hear about what's happening in the fall. We will again continue to offer some webinars and let us know. We'll send out a survey to you. Let us know some things that you might be wanting for us to learn more about from some of our alumni, and we'll be happy to offer those come fall. So thanks, Kim. Enjoy your day in the garden. And thanks, everybody. Enjoy your weekend of gardening this weekend. Hopefully it's going to be good weather in the province.
So.
And
I'm okay with rain too.
we need some moisture. So people get into your gardens and happy gardening, and please stay well and stay safe out there.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, everybody. It's nice to see everybody.